इधर लोग ना बेटा उनकी वॉइस नहीं जा रही उनको।
वो प्रॉब्लम आ रहा है उनकी वॉइस में। अब हो गया
हो गया
वो तो
क्या?
उधर ही है। हाँ
वहीं पर है।
Good morning. Sir, should we start?
Yes, I think we should start. This is the time.
Yes.
Relationship is the art of sharing or discovering something extraordinary about ordinary people and saying with ordinary words something extraordinary. Good morning to all gathered here today. Research and innovation are essential to the growth and advancement of any nation. A conference like Sahityavithi provides a perfect platform for sharing the latest research and fostering discussions that contribute to our collective progress. Our esteemed chief guest of the day, Dr. Pramod K. Nair, Fellow of English Association, Fellow of Royal Historical Society, UNESCO Chair in Vulnerability Studies, Department of English, University of Hyderabad, Hyderabad. Honorable Vice Chancellor and Conference Patron Dr. Upinder Dhar, Rector and Dean FDSR and Conference Patron Dr. Santosh Dhar, Director CISHA and Convener Dr. Dinesh Nagar, Head of Humanities Department Dr. Rupa Shinde, Conference Coordinators Dr. Pamela Nima and Dr. K. Subramanian. All the directors, deans, HOIs, HODs, coordinators, faculty members, delegates, participants, and dear students. I, Dr. Sheetal Jain, welcome you all to the inaugural session of Sahityavithi, a virtual conference dedicated to exploring innovative ideas and advancement in research. Every great idea begins with a question. Every transformative thought takes root in a dialogue, and every leap forward is fueled by the spark of innovation. Today, as we gather at Sahityavithi, we are not just participants in a conference, but contributors to a dynamic exchange of ideas that has the power to redefine perspectives, challenge conventions, and shape the future of literary research. As we set out on this intellectual voyage, let us lift the light of knowledge and invoke the divine blessings of Goddess Saraswati. Let this conference be a pathway to new ideas and meaningful research. I request the technical team to play the video.
असतो मा सद्गमय तमसो मा ज्योतिर्गमय मृत्युर्मामृतं गमय ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः या कुन्देन्दुतुषारहारधवला या शुभ्रवस्त्रावृता या वीणावरदण्डमण्डितकरा या श्वेतपद्मासना या ब्रह्माच्युतशङ्करप्रभृतिभिः देवैः सदा वन्दिता सा मां पातु सरस्वती भगवती निःशेषजाड्यापहा.
Thank you. Dear audience, today we are both privileged and delighted to welcome Dr. Pramod K. Nair, a name that stands as a symbol of research in excellence in research and scholarship. I request Honorable Vice Chancellor Dr. Upinder Dhar, Rector and Dean FDSR Dr. Santosh Dhar, Director CISHA and Conference Convener Dr. Dinesh Nagar, Head of Humanities Department Dr. Rupa Shinde, to give a warm welcome to our Chief Guest Dr. Pramod K. Nair. Thank you, sir. I would like to invite Director Sisha and Conference Convener Dr. Dinesh Nagar, a distinguished individual known for his wealth of knowledge, innovative ideas, and strong academic presence, to give welcome address and to brief us about the conference and set the tone for today's proceedings. Sir, please.
सर पूछिए.
Yes, sir. Am I audible to you?
Yes, yes, you're audible.
We wait for a minute, ma'am.
बस ठीक है ना, यही रहना नहीं.
स्कैम हो रहा है और हमारे दोस्त की मम्मी के अकाउंट से 1 करोड़ 30 लाख का स्कैम. जी हाँ, अब तो सब जगह आने भी शुरू हो गया, फिर भी लोग फंस देखो आप.
Nagar sir, so you can start with your welcome address.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sheetal Jain. At the onset, on behalf of Sri Vaishnav Institute of Social Sciences, Humanities and Arts, which is one of the constituent institute of Sri Vaishnav Vidyapeeth Vishwavidyalaya, SVV, I take this privileged opportunity to extend warm greetings and happy morning to all the esteemed scholars, researchers, delegates, students who are connected online and are attending the inaugural ceremony of Sahityavithi 2024, the sixth national conference in English language and literature, revolving around the theme re-examining voices, narratives, and viewpoints in English literature. It is with immense pleasure I welcome you all to this conference. Chief guest of the inaugural ceremony, an eminent English scholar, writer, respected Dr. Pramod K. Nair, UNESCO Chair in Vulnerability Studies, Department of English, from the University of Hyderabad, Vice Chancellor of the university, esteemed Dr. Upendhar, Rector and Patron of Sahityavithi, respected Dr. Santosh Dhar, respected deans, directors, HODs, faculty colleagues, HOD English, Dr. Rupa Shinde, coordinator of the conference, Dr. Pamela Nema and Dr. Subramaniam, members of the functional team of SVV staff and dear students. It is a known fact that worldwide English is the most widely spoken international language. An estimated 1.5 billion people, representing 20% of the global population, residing across more than 100 countries, speak English. The English literature has long history and thus having a complex symphony of voices, narratives, and ideas. For centuries, and most prominently during the colonial times, it has reinforced dominant ideologies, and consequently, the literary studies have been guided by a set of established viewpoints of the colonial power. The privileged white, Eurocentric, and elite authors during the colonial period, due coverage was not given to cultural and social issues, while the voices of the less fortunate class of people have been ignored. In recent decades, we have witnessed a paradigm shift that challenges the hegemonic voices and brings together and forward the silenced voice of the underprivileged, marginalized communities, rural population, and those from diverse linguistic and cultural backgrounds. There has been an increased movement to amplify voices that have been previously sidelined during the colonial period, like the voices of women, indigenous people, racial minorities, LGBTQI plus individuals. This shift challenges not only the content of the literature, but also the power structure and dynamics that determine who get heard and how now noticed. English literature is built upon large number of which includes patriarchy and during the post-colonial era worldwide, evidence exists that substantial number of authors and writers have engaged themselves in weaving counter narratives that alternative visions of the world. The boundaries of the narratives are not just confined to stories, they are a potent tool for constructing and deconstructing reality. They shape our perception of the world, how we understand ourselves, and how we relate to others. The English literature should not be a static examination of the past work, but a dynamic engagement with ongoing literary conversations. Our focus on re examining voices and narratives compels us to confront the power dynamics inherent in how stories are told and whose stories get prominence. By foregrounding traditionally marginalized voices, we enrich our understanding of human experience and broaden the scope of the literary canon itself. Of the many sub-themes, one of the sub-themes focus on fictive testimonies and women narratives of violence. within literary narratives. Similarly, another sub-theme deals with issue of disability and children's literature. The reflections critically challenge us to analyze how disability is represented and, importantly, how these representations impact the understanding and acceptance of diverse experiences within both adult and children's literature. Similarly, Shakespeare and India invites us to reconsider the global reach and interpretations of canonical works, acknowledging the multifaceted way in which they are received and reimagined across cultures. This conference provides a platform to critically assess and reassess established paradigms. We are not simply adding new voices to the conversation, we are reshaping the conversation itself, exploring how intersectionality shapes identity and narrative, and how the interplay of various perspectives create a richer, more nuanced understanding of the world around us. The subthemes from science fiction to post-humanism to eco-horror and translation studies reflect the multifaceted nature of this re-examination, demonstrating the vibrant and interdisciplinary nature of contemporary literary scholarships. We are confident that the presentation and discussion throughout Sahityavithi 2024 will generate stimulating debate and provide valuable insights into the diverse voices that shape our literary heritage. With these brief remarks, I welcome you all. We are confident that the deliberations and discussions we will be having in 2 days of this conference will provide valuable insights into how English continues to be an evolving and powerful force in articulation of our identities and experiences. We look forward for an engaged and thoughtful deliberations and discussions which may broaden our intellectual horizons and forge new paths of literary scholarship. Before I conclude, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to our keynote speakers, panelists, contributors to this conference, and participants. Thank you, and we look forward to a fruitful and enriching conference ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir, for setting a perfect tone for this conference. Writing a perfect research paper is no less than a military operation, as it demands discipline, foresight, research strategy, and if done right, ends in a total victory. Ladies and gentlemen, it's now time for a special moment as we unveil the e-souvenir Sankshet. This publication is testament to the dedication and hard work of our contributors who have shared their insights and research experiences. I request our chief guest along with all the dignitaries to release the e-souvenir Sankshet. Technical team, I request you to please play the video. Thank you. Dear audience, it's a great honor to introduce Dr. Pramod K. Nair, our chief guest today. He is a distinguished scholar, a visionary thinker, and a source of invaluable knowledge, whose contribution continue to shape the landscape of cultural studies, post-colonial theory, and literary criticism. I would like to invite Head of Humanities Department, Dr. Rupa Shinde, to introduce our chief guest today, Dr. Pramod K. Nair. Ma'am, please, over to you.
Yeah. It's my honor and privilege to welcome you all to Sahityavithi 2024, where we come together to celebrate and delve into the world of literature. Today, we have gathered brilliant minds, passionate readers, and esteemed speakers who share an unyielding love for the written word. As we embark on this exciting literary journey, it's time to introduce a person who truly exemplifies the spirit of literature in academia, our distinguished chief guest for the day, Professor Pramod K. Nair. Professor Pramod K. Nair is Senior Professor and holder of the UNESCO Chair in Vulnerability Studies at the University of Hyderabad. He was SMUT's Visiting Fellow in Commonwealth Studies at the University of Cambridge in 2000 to 2001, the Charles Wallace India Trust British Council Fellow at the University of Kent at Canterbury in the UK 2001, and a Fulbright Fellow at Cornell University in 2004 to 5. He is a Fellow of the English Association and a Fellow of the Royal Historical Society. In 2018, he received the Visitors Award for the Best Research in the Arts, Humanities and Social Sciences from the Honorable President of India, which cited in particular his work on human rights and literature, Bhopal and subaltern literature. Since 2019, annual studies conducted by Center for Publication Ethics, Savitribai Phule University, Pune, showed that Professor Nair remained the second most published researcher in arts and humanities in India and South Asia in terms of work indexed in the Arts and Humanities Citation Index Web of Science. He has appeared regularly in Year's work in English studies, the standard evaluative work of criticism in English published by Oxford University Press. A Stanford study places him the top 2% among global scientists and the only academician working in India in literary studies. For the past decade, he has focused on human rights, climate crisis, vulnerability, and precarious lives with a series of books and essays on the subject while continuing work on various aspects of the British Empire in India. Professor Nair's writings have appeared in the form of academic monographs, popular history writing, academic book reviews, essays in scholarly journals, and over 400 essays and journalistic pieces in newspapers and periodicals in India. His writings have appeared in The Wire, Telangana Today, The Telegraph, The Hindu Business Line, E-Social Sciences, Deccan Chronicle, Daily News and Analysis, and Deccan Herald. His academic interests and specializations, in which he has published consistently and substantially, include colonial writings on India, travel writing, post-humanism and cultural studies, including emotion culture studies, celebrity studies, superheroes, science and culture, and graphic novels. Besides these, he has also published on extreme cultures and subjects like the Bhopal tragedy. Professor Nair serves on the editorial boards of Indian Journal of Gender Studies, Celebrity Studies, Journal of Post-Colonial Writing, besides being a reviewer and referee for dozens of journals and publishers worldwide. His work has been featured in numerous journals, including Modern Fiction Studies, English Language Notes, Post-Colonial Studies, Journal of Early Modern Cultural Studies, Studies in Travel Writing, Biography, Westerly, Transnational Literature, and Ariel, among others. He is a member of various advisory and editorial boards, the Critical Posthumanism book series from the Brill, the New Directions in Life narrative series, and from Routledge, the academic board of the Global Posthuman Network, the Linus University Center for Concurrences in Colonial and Post-Colonial Studies, Routledge Historical Resources, Oxford Bibliography Online, the Memory Studies Research Network, among others. His books have been published by Routledge, Polity, Anthem, Cambridge University Press, Bloomsbury, Palgrave Macmillan, Wiley Blackwell, Sage, D. Greta, Roman and Littlefield, Penguin India, Orient Black Swan, Deck Books, Viva. Other than books, his essays have appeared in anthologies from these publishers as well. Please join me in extending a warm and hearty welcome to Dr. Pramod K. Nair, whose remarkable contributions to the field of English literature contribute to inspire and shape the minds of students, writers, and literary enthusiasts around the world. Thank you, Dr. Nair, for being with us today. We are incredibly excited to hear from you and look forward to your valuable words. Over to you, sir.
Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Rupa, for that very warm welcome to Dr. Dinesh Nagar, the authorities of this very historic institution, very highly respected institution. It should have been fantastic, of course, to be there in person, but at some point we shall, hopefully meet. Thank you, Sheetal, for running the program at the start. But thanks most of all to Pamela Anima for persuading me to join, at least in the online mode here, for putting together what looks to me an illustration of the point Professor Nagar made, that it's not just a question of reading English literature as it used to be, but English literature as it can and potentially become. That was a very welcome move, Professor Nagar. So I'm thankful to you for setting the tone. It would be, of course, fantastic to see how an annual event like this shapes literary studies, and more specifically, because that's one area I'm interested in, to see how it shapes research, given the pressures that the humanities are constantly under, to see if these kinds of events inspire younger faculty and students to think in new and challenging ways of reading new texts, but also new ways of reading older texts. That it need not necessarily be that everybody is looking for a new novel or a new poet, but there are new ways of reading older things too. As Montaigne said, we don't need to interpret texts as much as we need to interpret interpretations. And to interpret a text is also to interpret multiple worlds. And hence the operative title phrase of your conference has to do with visions and revisions. And you see again, you revision, but you also revise. That's crucial because it's instrumental in the way we look at literature itself. My talk today has to do with rereading literature with a very specific contextual focus. That's the climate crisis. And it has everything to do with poetry and the planet. We tend to think of fiction as being the key genre when we look at, say, climate crisis, but poetry has its own crucial role to play in all of this. And that is important because we also see poetry as a far more complex process. And the reason why it's important to think in terms of poetry is because as a compressed form of the literary, it poses certain difficulties and certain challenges. So when we speak about re-examining voices and revisioning voices, let's think in terms of what poetry also can do. So let me begin with a quotation from the Australian Aboriginal poet Udgaru Nunakal, whose poem The Unhappy Race carries these lines. I quote, "You alone have left nature and made civilized laws. You have enslaved yourselves as you enslaved the horse and other wild things. You alone have left nature and made civilized laws. You have enslaved yourselves as you enslaved the horse and other wild things." The you in the line in the lines is a species pronoun. It refers to the colonizing white race in particular, but could also refer to humanity in general for humanity's offenses writ upon the planet. Simon Ortiz, the Native American writer, says in his poem, Starting at the Bottom, when Jack Pyle opened up on Laguna land, Laguna, of course, is a prominent Native American tribe, some Laguna men got on all right at the bottom. The Acoma men, another tribe, went to the Ambrosia Lake mines and always got stuck by the space in the application forms for previous mining experience. It's a fascinating comment to make because he's saying the form said previous mining experience, but you see the Native Americans have never mined. Mining is a white man's job, which means the destruction, the extractivist projects are always that of the white man. So when the application form said previous mining experience, the Native Americans had nothing to say because they've never mined. They've never taken apart the world. What are these two doing? Ortiz and Nunakal are writing these lines in the midst of rapid and radical developments in global thinking about the planet. 1990 saw the publication of the first assessment report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Nunakal's poem was published in 1990 and Ortiz's in 1992, which is why I'm contextualizing it very specifically. So 1990, the first IPCC report. In 1991, the First Nation People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit was held, which formulated and published the 7 principles of environmental justice. The first Earth Summit, formerly called the United Nations World Conference on Environment and Development, was held in 1992, during which the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change was established. The appearance of climate change, climate crisis, and adjunct terms in public discourse, and of course the literary, cultural, imaginary, may be dated to these years. And the concept and term sustainable development was first defined in 1995. It was 2015, of course, before they came up with the idea of sustainable development goals. These ideas and contexts, when integrated into literary studies, the approach itself as a reimagining and a revisioning appears in the form of an ecopoetics. Ecopoetics is a literary enunciation of the themes and forms that are drawn from and drive the public discourse of anthropogenic climate shifts, from environmental degradation to caring for the planet. And ecopoetics, I argue, in this particular talk, emerges from roughly the late 1980s and the early 1990s, when climate change as a phrase, that's why I'm marking it as quotes, becomes a more or less acceptable public conversation topic. I'm interested in this particular topic in the global south. And by the global south, let me clarify, I refer to places and people who have been displaced, dispossessed, and dominated through racialized modes of conquest, oppression, and control, principally by European settlers and governance systems, and marked by uneven development during and after colonialism. So South here is both a geopolitical materiality and a metaphor. In any case, it takes seriously Timothy Clark's assertion that metaphorical statements have cognitive value of some ecologically valid kind, end quote. Metaphors of belonging and non-belonging, displacement and habitation serve the purpose of alerting us to histories of events. Poets from the formerly colonized nations produce a massive archive of suffering, by which I mean archive of both human and non-human suffering. This suffering stems from anthropogenic ecological ruin, solidarity with the indigenous peoples of Australia, and finally, caring for the planet. So there are 3 basic themes here. 1, it's an archive of suffering. 2, it shows solidarity with the indigenous people. And 3, it proposes care. The eco-poetics here very often, because it pays attention to the conditions in which... Hello? I'm getting some other...
Continue, sir.
Sheetal, can you please mute the...
Yeah, sure, sir. I do it, sir. I do it. You please continue, sir.
Thank you. Can I continue?
Yes, sir. Please, you continue.
Yeah. Ecopoetics has 2 components. Geopoetics, which is about the land, and geoaesthetics. And I think of these terms as more or less being conflatable. because geopoetics is about making the earth. So, which includes climate, weather, and geoaesthetics is when aesthetics merges with geography. It has to do with literary and cultural sensibilities, which is, of course, our focus. And ecopoetics has been at the center of poetry and poetry criticism for several decades now. And this has to do with an attempt to portend, anticipate cognitive and intuitive possible worlds as a counterpoint to our contemporary understanding of place, which includes insights into the possibilities of placation and celebration in poetry. Basically, it means that we start rethinking our relationship with the earth through poetry. And this is what the eco-critic Greg Gerard and Gina Garcia Chua call an eco-pedagogy, where, and I quote, eco-pedagogy is the close reading of poetry which deserves a place at the center of our conception of eco-literacy and not the periphery. So you start thinking of the planet as at the center. And this very often, given our climate crisis, is referred to as Anthropocene reading as well. Now, I will open with this point that ecopoetics is a planetary ecological consciousness, even when it speaks about the local and the particular. Why? How do I make this claim? The point is that it's no longer possible to think of local conditions as hermetically sealed. Whatever happens in your backyard originates from somewhere else. For example, when Chernobyl disaster happened, the black rain from that particular disaster fell over places as far as England and Sweden. Materials such as toxins flow upward in the oceans all the way to Siberia and the Arctic Circle. So in many ways, the local has always now, in the last 5 decades or so, been embedded in the planet and planetary conditions, which is why most of the post-colonial eco-poetry that I am interested in refers to a planetary solidarity, which acknowledges human existence and its dependence on the flourishing of the biosphere together. And that's very important. So a planetary ecological consciousness, more often than not, cuts across human and non-human, living and non-living. It is interested in the making and unmaking, but also the remaking of worlds. And I want you to please keep this in mind when you look at, say, ecological approaches to the planet. The making, the unmaking, and the remaking of worlds, which is the re-examination of your conference title. When we speak about making, unmaking, and remaking, we are interested in the way the world is put together, but we are also alert to histories such as plantations and slavery and dispossession, globalization, colonialism, that have fashioned the planet in unjust and unequal ways. And the poets are bearing witness to this. But that's unmaking, right? The world has been unmade. But is that enough? The poets also propose alternative ways of seeing and meaning making. Romanticized and sentimental representations of the land apart, there are also the mythic spiritual aspects of ancestral lands. And in most of these poets, you see the reference or references to older myths where the land has been sacralized and has been rendered sacred. Then, of course, there is the emphasis on colonialism, and most of the global South poets note the fact that the continuing disaster in the global South is a legacy of the colonial period. So this is where eco-poetics and geo-aesthetics and geopoetics come together, because you cannot speak about the aesthetic elements here, the aesthetic factors here, without also referring to the histories that those lands have been subject to. A few quick examples would suffice to show this link between geopoetics and geoaesthetics. And please note, in everything that I'm saying here, geopoetics and geoaesthetics go together. Tanure Ujjayi describes, African poet, how after the land has been mined and exploited, and he says, it needs to be scrubbed with bare hands. It needs to be scrubbed with bare hands. Craig Santos Perez, who's from Guam, in his series From Unincorporated Territory, maps the American military colonial naming, boundary marking, building that marked and deformed Guam. Linda Hogan, a Native American writer, shows a very profound melancholia, which talks about the indigenous lands that are now dispossessed and desacralized. Or if you take Brandine Alani McDougall's This Island on Which I Love You, in which she notes that whatever passes for modernity on the island is, and she puts it like this, built around the grenaded graves of the natives. The grenaded graves of the natives' ancestors, which means, effectively, today's land, which has its military structures or factories, are lands that have been taken away from the natives. They've been desacralized. Ben Okri will say the earth is burned. John Kinsella, writing in the post-colonial era, is conscious of the fact that the lands in Australia belong to the indigenous people. What is this going on? I'm proposing to you that this is a certain alertness, which is not a simple romanticization of the land. It's not just a simple localism. The poets see and represent how the locale or the locality has been transformed due to the rhizomatic connections across distant spaces. So it's not like the village in Nigeria has been ruined by itself. Nigeria's village or villages have been ruined because they're connected to a larger global network. Critics like Sule in Emmanuel Igia admit that the eco-poetics in African poetry do show romanticism, but they're very alert to the fact that historical causes such as colonialism, post-colonial corruption, and human greed bring about the changes in their countries. The land's changes are captured in Ben Okri, who writes about Tanzania's, quote, mountains of gold have become what he calls craters of dead stones. The mountains of gold have become craters of dead stones. Why is this important? It's important because these poets point to the link between environmental and social injustice, that you cannot separate environmental injustice from social injustice. Whether it is about the land, whether it's about the water, whether it's about the animal and plant life, what's going on now is, like I said, a legacy. It's a legacy of things that have happened for the last 400 years, of things that have very long histories that are embedded in the land. Now, over and above the accounts of violent alterations to the land, there are the exploitative and unequal social practices which stretch from the colonial era to the present. And this is very important because when you're looking at the twin injustices, environmental and social injustice, you can't blame everything on the colonials, which is what all post-colonial nations do, right? We blame everything on the British. We blame everything on the Europeans. But many of these authors are alert to the fact that the kinds of corruption we see, the kinds of post-colonial decrepitude that we see, cannot always be blamed on the colonial period. Some of this we have done ourselves. So I would like you to keep that in mind. But I want to move it one step further. This question of social and environmental injustice is also attentive to the shifting nature of human, non-human relationships. And what we do to the land, we also do to other animals. What we do to humans, we also do to animals and plants. So Joy Harjo, the Native American writer, in her title poem in her collection, A Map to the Next World, she says, quote, "We no longer know the names of the birds here, how to speak to them by their personal names. Human arrogance lies in taking upon himself, and the gender is crucial because it's a he most of the time. Human arrogance in taking upon himself is an attempt to determine the course of nature. So here is Linda Hogan writing in a poem called Naming the Animals. Quote, all things know the names for themselves, and no man speaks them or takes away their tongue. So what is Hogan saying? Hogan is saying our arrogance, human arrogance, because remember, we are making, unmaking, and remaking the world, right? We believe, as in humans believe, that the world is there for us to do whatever we want. The world exists for us to name. And then she says, all things, that is all other creatures, non-humans, know the names for themselves, and no man speaks them or takes away their tongue. You don't own the planet. You don't own the animals. Changes in our ownership, which is basically what this poem is talking about, means that we, as in humans, have decided that this is our place. The creatures are ours. And we make changes in the land. But when we make changes in the land, we also alter interspecies relationships. We change the demographics of who's the predator species, who's the prey. We make changes in keystone species or pollinators. And here is Craig Santos Perez writing about Guam. Quote, without birds, thousands of butterflies emerge from cocoons. What is Perez pointing to? Perez is noting the fact that all species are mutually dependent. The planet is what it is, not because humans are at the top or because we are powerful. We are that powerful, but because all life forms are at some point connected. No, they may be connected in different ways. They may be connected to greater or lesser degrees, but we are connected. In Gail Tremblay's poem Dimensions, she writes, even the maggots are part of the sacred circle, devouring the rot, cleaning the earth. Even the maggots can teach us to survive. So faced with drastic changes, this interspecies relationship or relationships is what is at stake. Now, you will say that this is also a certain romanticization, that the poets seem to propose that it's crucial to have interspecies connections. Well, yes, some of you might see it as a romanticization, but as evolutionary biologists will tell you, species connections is who we are. It is a part of how we have become what we are. Whether that is romanticization of an older way of life is an open debate. But what's important is to recognize the fact that in all these poems, you see a certain post-humanist stance. And the post-humanist stance has to do with looking at the world as an interconnected and networked condition. And therefore, none of the poets that I have mentioned here are focused solely on one local context. So in such a reading that I'm proposing, a merger of the geopoetics and the geoaesthetics, the poems are extracted beyond and outside the context in which they are usually read, so that they speak with an outside and beyond the immediate. We read for the planet, even when we are reading at the level of the local. What does reading for the planet mean? And I'm quoting here Jennifer Wenzel, who says that the locality, the way in which we read those texts, the way in which we understand those texts, and I quote, is not disembodied global cosmopolitan or universalist reading from nowhere. It's not a bird's eye view, but we read from near to there, between specific sites, across multiple divides, at more than one scale. Essentially, Wenzel, and this is my stance as well, is calling for a shuttle service, a multi-scalar reading between the microscopically specific and the world historical. It means moving from like that, expanding outward across time and space. Reading post-colonial ecopoetics is an instance of Anthropocene reading with attention to flows, trajectories, and systems that go beyond national borders. So you have to stop thinking of, oh, to borrow a famous line from Nizam Ezekiel, my backward place is where I am. Yes, your backward place is where you are, but your backward place has been constituted by the globe. So what I'm arguing here is, and this is, I hope, something that you can see as a future project for some of you. One, we make, unmake, and remake the world. The remaking of the world requires us to see interconnections. The unmaking of the world is the histories of colonialism, plantations, slavery, and of course, globalization and neocolonialism. So when post-colonial ecopoetics speaks about reading literature for the planet, reimagining the planet, re-envisioning the planet, it's proposing that you approach the text as embodying a multi-scalar approach. Multi-scalar, you look at multiple scales. So you start with the microscopic, you start with the local, and then you move outward like that. Why? Because the world is connected. I need hardly emphasize that the pandemic proved to us that the world is interconnected, right? One virus from one part of the world and the entire universe more or less shuts down. Now, why is this remaking of the world important? Why is the repair of the world, to borrow a phrase from John Tranto and Bernice Fisher about care, why is the repairing of the world important? The repairing of the world is an attempt to find an opportunity. And that opportunity is about the re-enchantment with the environment. The remaking of the world moves away from the unmaking towards healing, care, and re-enchantment. What does that re-enchantment entail? Benedict Mellon argues that, I quote, we are finally starting to do justice to the ancient knowledge of the land and its ecosystems that were weaved into ecopoetic ancient stories long before patriarchal Europeans imposed their own monolithic form of scientific discourse onto what was then discredited as pagan. So re-enchantment is a crucial form of re-engaging with the earth. It is not the only one, but it's a crucial one. What does that mean? I'll give you an example. In a poem titled Moving the Woodpile, Linda Hogan's speaker picks up a bunch of wood, okay? And she discovers that under that there's a whole world. Now you would think, oh, that's not nice, what you see, the worms and things like that. But Linda Hogan's speaker says, the flourishing life world haunts her several years later. She recalls that moment when the creatures refuse to trust her or approach her, and she wonders what she can do. So she describes it like this: holding out the nest for them, placing it down, never for them to approach, and how I waited, how I watched. This is re-enchantment. It's the remaking of the world, or I use a rather crude term, but I hope you understand why. It's the repairing of the world. Reimagining, re-envisioning is a repairing of the world. The speaker recognizes that the life world is remade and repaired through care. Hogan's speaker is implicitly addressing a history of humanity's destructive potential and is now alerting us to the fact that we have to hold it together again. Humanity has not cared for the multiple life worlds sustained by even a small thing such as a woodpile. And perhaps that is what humanity needs to do. Ecopoetics from the formerly colonized nations embodies biogeophilia, as I have described elsewhere. It's a love of the land and its life forms. So it's not a question of just liking the land, but all its inhabitants as well. And this re-enchantment has biogeophilia, which is actually the poetry of environmentalism. I am putting it all under the last category, re-enchantment or repair, but it consists of very specific things. And let me reiterate what I've said before I conclude so that we have some time for discussion. One, it involves a multi-scalar reading. You scale it upward. You move from the local to the world. Two, you look at the interconnectedness of all living and non-living things. All right? You pay attention to the layers of the earth. You pay attention to the layers of the air. You pay attention to the water. You pay attention to multiple time scales, human, non-human, non-living. So you have multi-scalar, what I refer to as human time, non-human time, and non-living time. If you were to think in terms of, say, Aboriginal or indigenous poetry, you'll quickly recognize the fact that they think in terms of not calendar time, but say seasonal time or time in terms of their ancestors. Which is to say that when you look at multi-scalar worlds, you are moving beyond immediacies of human time. You're looking at something that is beyond even the human. The time of the dinosaurs, the time of the earth. We know that the earth is 4.5 billion years old and humanity's only life appeared after that and so on and so forth. And in the just before the Cretaceous period, the dinosaurs died out. Then various forms of evolution and various lines of evolution emerged, and we have humanity appearing 1.5 billion years ago, right? The re-enchantment calls for us to expand like this. You think beyond human time. You think earth time. You think planetary time. This is what we refer to as an Anthropocene reading. Second, or third, I forget the point sequence, please forgive me for that. We examine the poiesis, the making of habitats and habitation. But habitats and habitation will be multi-species. Not humanity at the peak alone, but multi-species. So re-enchantment and envisioning literary texts from the global south has to do with a considerable interest in intra and interspecies interactions. Intra and interspecies interactions. And you define the habitat as not just natural and nature, but a mix of nature and culture, where, whether you like it or not, humanity is a part of it. But also, as Tim Morton and others have argued, why do we think of nature and culture as two contrasting and two oppositional things? Culture is a part of nature. So re-enchantment, or what I've said, making, unmaking and remaking, in the remaking stage, we start thinking of what's now being called a post-natural imagination, which is a new wilderness that has humans part of it, human technology is a part of it, human capital is a part of it. Finally, we address themes of environmental justice, where if you are thinking in terms of multi-species, you also need to think in terms of as fair a chance of life chances for everybody. Now, we know that life chances are differential and unequal, but the attempt is to see that everybody has a chance to live. I'll conclude with, and I'm just on schedule, I think, Linda Hogan again, one of my current favorite poets, in a poem called The Eyes of the Animals, where she says, when you see any of these, you know, all they want is to live, to survive, to care for their playful young, just as we do. Let me read that again. Please understand why I'm saying this. This is a set of lines about multi-species worlds, about post-natural worlds, about remaking and repairing the world. And this is what is broadly in critical theory called Anthropocene solidarity. Please note, it's about scales, it's about multiple species, right? Let me quote again. When you see any of these, you know, all they want is to live, to survive, to care for their playful young, just as we do. Other animals have the same requirements. only survival, to care for the young, just as we do. This is the attempt to re-enchant the world, to say that humans are not superior. Humans are not the apex. We are apex and superior in terms of our destructive potential. But the animals also want the same thing as we do. All they want is to live, to survive, to care, just as we do. This solidarity and sensibility about anthropogenic climate crisis and possible anthropogenic solutions leads Linda Hogan to conclude her dedications to the volume called Dark Sweet with this advice and prayer. And I'll conclude with that. And this is Linda Hogan. May you remember to care for this earth, all we have. The living earth will care back. Let me quote that again. May you remember to care for this earth, all we have. The living earth will care back. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. It is always a kind of learning experience to listen to you. And it's very difficult for me to say anything after your words. But sir, I must say the way you directed your today's talk, post-colonial eco-poetics, and connected it with making, unmaking, and remaking, it is highly appreciable. And you are absolutely right, sir, when you said that we should not always blame post-colonial or post-colonial power for any kind of change, environmental and social changes. We should blame ourselves also. So thank you so much, sir, for taking time out of your chock-a-block schedule and to grace our today's conference, sir. Before we move to the next segment, I request all the panelists, please turn on your video so that we can capture this special moment today. I request all the panelists, please turn on your video. Thank you so much, everyone. Now, I would like to invite Dr. Pamela Nima, Coordinator Sahityavithi, to propose words of thanks.
Thank you, Sheetal ma'am. Honorable Chief Guest, Professor Dr. Pramod K. Nair, Senior Professor and holder of the UNESCO Chair in Vulnerability Studies at the University of Hyderabad. Dr. Santosh Dhar, Conference Patron and Rector and Dean, FDSR. Esteemed chairpersons of the sessions, Dr. Paritosh Duggar, Dr. Captain Indrani MR, and Dr. Vikas Sharma. Conveners, Sahityavithi 2024, Dr. Dinesh Nagar, Director Swisha, and Dr. Rupa Shinde, Head Humanities. Dr. K. Subramaniam, participants, HOIs, HODs, faculty members, and dear students. Thank you is such a prayer that cannot be seen or touched. It must be felt by heart. Today is a special occasion of Sahityavithi 2024, and it is my honor to be surrounded by so many erudites. It's a proud privilege to propose words of thanks on behalf of Shri Vaishnav Vidyapeeth Vishwavidyalaya. At the outset, I would like to take this opportunity to place on record our heartiest thanks to our Honorable Chief Guest, Dr. Pramod K. Nair. Today, my words are not enough to express the gratitude to Professor Nair, who graced us with his words and presence. Thank you for enlightening us with your knowledge and presence. I, on behalf of the Organizing Committee of Sahityavithi 2024, convey deep regards and hearty thanks to our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Dr. Upinder Dhar, who is always a source of encouragement in promoting research activities in the university. I would also like to extend my sincere thanks to Conference Patron Dr. Santosh Dhar and Dr. Dinesh Nagar. Their continuous guidance and support and active involvement only has made this conference a reality. My heartfelt thanks to Dr. Rupa Shinde to support us at every moment of the preparation of the conference. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank all distinguished plenary speakers, Dr. Paritosh Duggar, Dr. Captain Indrani MR, and Dr. Vikas Sharma, chairs and technical chairs, Dr. Ashok Sachdeva, Professor, MJB Government Girls College Indore, for accepting our invitation. An event cannot happen overnight. The wheels start rolling months in advance. I am also very much thankful to Dr. K. Subramaniam, and words are not enough to thank his constant support to shape the conference in the present state. My special thanks to Professor Satish Patel of Journalism Department, who has helped us in making all the technical files of AVs of inaugural session. Susha is indeed a team of motivated and dedicated colleagues and committee members. I thank everyone for the involvement they have shown and the willingness they have expressed in the completion of the task beyond their comfort zones. I am very much thankful to Mr. Nitin Saraogi, Mr. Ankit Tiwari, Mr. Rohan Gupta, Mr. Devendra Kuril, who have helped us in smooth conduct of the program. I feel proud and thankful for making this event a successful one. Thanks to all the people who helped us either directly or indirectly to make this conference happen. My grateful thanks to all the delegates who have contributed their research papers for the conference. Last but not the least, I would like to thank our informed audience, without whose participation and involvement, no such event is complete. Once again, a big thanks to Dr. Nair. If time is money, sir, then today you have spent millions for us. Thank you once again and happy learning.
Thank you so much, Pamela ma'am. We hope that throughout the day we will have the privilege of listening to intellectual minds whose insights and perspectives will enrich our understanding and inspire us to new heights of knowledge and wisdom. I request all of you to please rise for national anthem.
Yes, we can together sing, I think.
Yes, I think we can sing together.
Yes,
Ma'am.
yes, we can sing together.
Jana Gana Mana Adinayak Jai
जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता
Punjab Sindh Gujarat
Ganga,
Vindhya
वंदे जय
Naga
उज्जल जननी
Tava Shubh Name
में जाके
Gaye
तब जयकार
Jana Gana Mangal
Bharat Bhaki
भाग्य विधाता
Jai
जय
Jai
जय
Jai
जय जय जय
Bharat Mata ki
Yeah,
Bharat Mata ki
yeah.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. I think Nair sir has left the meeting.
Yes.
Yes.
चलो बढ़िया हुआ शानदार
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. We can continue with the same link for plenary session also. So this is the same link for the plenary session. Thank you,
I
everyone.
think there is still time, 15 minutes.
Yes,
Huh?
yes, there are
Yes.
15 minutes.
Mm.
So we can take a leave of 15 minutes now because
Yes.
12:30 we have given to the guests. So we
Okay.
can remain here.
Okay.
अरे यार,